Hi, I'm Ray Grijalba, and this is The Joy of the Faith. In the last 6 years since I got back into my faith, I've met many people who had family members who left the church, or friends who have no interest in Catholicism. From this, it's clear that many people think, why should I be Catholic? What is it that the Catholic faith has to offer me? With so many different interests and personalities, it's hard to have one answer, but we all have one thing in common. We want to be happy. The answer to why should I be Catholic is that it will allow you to live the happiest life possible. And that's a pretty bold claim, right? But I'm able to say this because Harvard recently did the longest study ever performed on happiness. For almost 80 years, they've been studying the lives of hundreds of men. Some became doctors, others alcoholics. One man studied actually became the President of the United States, JFK. According to Robert Waldinger, the director of the study and professor at Harvard Medical School, the result was that good relationships keep us happier and healthier. Period. The Catholic faith has allowed me to live the happiest life possible, as it has equipped me and can equip you to have the best relationships. And I'll tell you how. But first you're probably thinking, what about all the corruption? I mean, the recent sexual abuse scandal, that's not really a case of a good relationship, right? And I'll be the first to admit that people in the church have done horrible things. But when you judge something, you don't analyze it just by the worst. You also look at the best. Let's take America, for example. America's done some pretty bad things, like the treatment of the American Indians, allowing slavery, and I'm sure people could think of more. But just because some members did awful things doesn't mean that I should leave this country. To fairly analyze America, we have to look at the good that they've done as well, such as essentially rebuilding Europe after World War II through the Marshall Plan, incredible technological advances, and more. So we'll do the same for Catholicism. We'll look at the best members of the church, those who we call saints. A saint is a person that learns self-mastery by living a virtuous life. But before going further, I want to ask you 3 questions. Have you ever done something that you regretted and wish you could have a clean slate? Is there a person in your life that you can't stand? Do you want to be better than you are? These are super important questions, and we'll be addressing this video, so please keep watching. The Catholic Church was established by Jesus 2,000 years ago, so there are thousands of men and women that we could choose from, but we'll just pick 3 from the last 100 years. Mother Teresa is one that most of us know, but you may not know that she opened an AIDS clinic. She did this long before society deemed it acceptable to have anything to do with AIDS patients. So much so that community opposition at the time forced cancellation of plans for other AIDS centers in New York City. Catholics caring for AIDS patients when the community rejected them? That's something you wouldn't expect, right? Another still example is Maximilian Kolbe, who volunteered to die in place of a stranger at the Auschwitz concentration camp in 1941. Laying down your life for someone you don't even know? That takes incredible selflessness. What a heroic act. Catherine Drexel is another saint who by her death in 1955 spent $12 million of her own inheritance on building over 60 schools for African Americans and Indian Americans. Can you imagine spending millions of your own inheritance on others? How are these men and women able to do such sacrificial things? Because they had the best relationships with God first and foremost, and He allowed their joy to spill over to others. You can live a happy life and have the best relationships by using 3 tools that the church offers: confession and spiritual direction, our unique philosophy on suffering, and the Eucharist. Some of you watching are probably thinking, what the heck is he talking about? And don't worry, I'll walk through each of them. But as a side note, I met my wife through the Eucharist, so guys, listen up. Question number 1, have you ever done something you regretted and wish you could get guidance on it? I know I have. The Catholic Church offers confession, which is where you confess your sins to a priest, either behind a screen, which I prefer, or face-to-face. How does this help with your relationships, you might ask? Well, let me give you a comparison. When you're trying to improve your golf swing, you record yourself and slow it down so you can see the small errors that you made. This is essentially what we do when we're preparing for confession. We reflect on what we did and how we harmed our relationships by selfishness, pride, or other things. In confession, we get a clean slate and vow to never do those sins we confessed again. Yes, we may fail, but we're striving for self-mastery. Mother Teresa says, knowledge of self is very necessary for confession. She actually went to confession once a week. She understood that just like athletes, when you recognize your weaknesses, your coach, in this case the priest, can give you spiritual direction on which virtues to grow in. Say, for example, you struggle with pride. You always think that your spouse or your friends are wrong. The priest may give you advice as to how to grow in humility. It sounds similar to what a psychologist or counselor would do, right? It is. But it's free, and a counselor or psychologist will not tell you that you're forgiven. But in confession, God forgives your sins. Isn't that incredible? Also, I'm not saying that psychology is not needed sometimes, but I'm sure that there are some wounds that only the true physician can heal. Question number 2, is there a person in your life that you just can't stand? I'm sure for some of you, 1 or 2 people come to mind, or maybe more. So how do we live with these people? Through the church's unique perspective on suffering. Suffering is something that's basically guaranteed in life, and while it's not pleasant, it can be used for something glorious. The church teaches that we can rejoice in our sufferings, as Colossians 1:24 says. Rejoice in our sufferings? That sounds insane. But we all know those people that complain, and when they're in pain, everyone knows about it. This complaining can drive people away and weaken our relationships. As Catholic Christians, we look to our guide, Jesus, who suffered without complaint for love of us. Look, suffering's not easy, but we can do incredible things for those that we love. This is how we can rejoice in our sufferings, by directing it for the well-being of a family member or friend so that it has a purpose. And it doesn't have to be anything huge. Say, for example, you have a coworker that's giving you a hard time. Rather than being a jerk back to them, you can suffer with a smile, or some would say, offer it up. Maybe in the moment you're not happy, but by holding your tongue, you prevent a future escalation that leads to a happier relationship in the long term. I can only imagine how many times Mother Teresa was taking care of someone dying who smelled terrible and offered it up for them rather than running away. We too in our lives can offer up the challenges for a purpose, whether it's a headache, a very intense workout at the gym, a teenager that's driving us up the wall, or a spouse that's suffering from cancer that is needing our constant care. By offering up our suffering, no matter what trauma impacts our relationships, we can persevere. Question number 3. Do you want to be better than you are right now? While other faiths may have the ability to relate with confession and suffering, the Eucharist is only found in the Catholic Church and is most powerful in improving relationships. This is going to sound really bizarre, so brace yourselves, all right? So we believe that the Eucharist is literally Jesus himself. Crazy, right? As Jesus says in the Gospels, this is my body, and we take him at his word. We receive him at Mass, and he transforms us so that it's no longer us, but Christ living through us. You've heard the statement, you are what you eat, and as we eat Jesus, we become more like him, the true source of joy and peace. Catherine Drexel, who I mentioned before, said, if we wish to serve God and love our neighbor well, we must manifest our joy in the service we render to him and them. She obtained her joy by receiving Jesus at Mass every day, and she knew that the best friendships were rooted in service. We hate when we have friends that take and never give. But by receiving the one who came to serve and not be served, we can imitate him and better love our families, detach from the stresses we all face, and better orient our lives to serve God and our friends. As a result, we live the happiest lives, because how could you be happier than receiving God himself? So to wrap up this video, I want you to think about the relationships in your life. Could you benefit by reflecting on your relationships and getting guidance on what virtues to grow in? I know my relationships with my family and my spouse have dramatically improved since I started going to confession once a month. Is there suffering in your life that you wish had a purpose? This has transformed the way that I work out, fast, care for Anne-Marie, who's carrying twins right now, which is pretty awesome. And finally, do you want to be better than you are? Is there something that you wish you could be freed from? That's definitely a yes for me. While I was extremely impatient in high school and college, I've grown dramatically in patience by allowing Christ to change the way that I view life, by receiving him in the Eucharist at Mass. Now, if you answered yes to any of those questions, I encourage you to look into the Catholic faith. I'll make future videos on theological things like belief in God and Protestant questions for Catholics. But really, when it comes down to it, it's all about our relationship with God and our relationship with others. And I've shown that we can have the best relationships by these 3 things that I've shared. The Catholic faith is the best thing that's ever happened in my life and made me happier than I ever thought I could be. So a final question I have for you is, what do you have to lose compared to what joy and happiness you could gain?